You don't need to invent things. You can just go and find something and bring it to a new market. When you're selling to customers who don't know you, can't trust you, you've got to find something. As an entrepreneur, you get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
I have to ask you about, you're probably sick of talking about, it's not a plastic bag.
80,000 people queued in the UK in one day for that bag. So it was absolutely mad.
Today's episode is all about the business of building a global brand. And I'm joined by Dame Anya Hindmarch, designer, entrepreneur, and one of the most influential figures in British fashion. Anya started her business at just 19 and went on to build a globally recognised brand known for its creativity, humour and purpose. From launching I'm Not a Plastic Bag to buying back her company and reinventing retail with The Village, her journey is full of bold moves and real insight. In this episode, we talk about building something that lasts, leading through change and the lessons Anya's learned from decades at the top of her game. Dame Anya Hindmarch. You must like hearing that.
I'm not really used to it yet, to be honest. I've used it about once. I used it once when actually I had to complain about something to a company that wasn't standing by a guarantee.
Oh, we have to get in that, because that's not really faking it till you make it. That's making influence after you've made it. If I was to start with you, were you 18 or 19 when you...
I was 18, I think.
Were in Italy,
Mm.
and so was that your first disruption? You saw a bag and you wanted to, can you tell that story?
Yeah, I think it sort of started actually when I was about 16 and I was given a second-hand bag of my mother's, and I remember how it made me feel. And I think that I realised at that point, and it was a time actually, it's been this huge boon of luxury. And my mother in those days had a black bag and a brown bag and a gold handbag in the evening. That was it. There was no sort of, there was no thing about brand and status, which is a very interesting part of luxury goods, which that I don't like actually. But so the sort of luxury industry was sort of nascent at that point, and sort of was a huge thing throughout the 80s, and I guess then also through various markets becoming, developing markets, developing countries, and people wanting to show their wealth and status through luxury, a new car, a new handbag, a new watch. And that was been a sort of a huge part of this world. But I remember how it made me feel, and therefore was really interested in the power of beautiful things and actually the mood-altering aspect. What particularly interested me actually was craftsmanship, much more. I don't love the status part, but the appreciation of craft and beautiful leather and craftsmanship and stitching and so on interests me. So, but that was what sort of sparked the idea, I think, with the backdrop of this this change of this sort of luxury world opening up. Then when I was 18, not many offers from university, sort of quite typically probably entrepreneurial in the sense slightly possibly dyslexic, and one might argue impatient in the classroom, probably not stupid, but definitely just sort of was restless. And it was that time of, anything's possible, which is a very important thing to think about today, I think, because I'm really worried about the generation now where they think maybe nothing is very possible. So it was yuppie time, it was that boom, it was like work hard, you will do well, and it was time to start businesses. And I remember seeing this full auditorium and thinking in London, as we launched it with supermarket partners all around the world, there were many examples around me of peers starting Carphone Warehouse, Pret-a-Manger. It was Next starting out. There were shopping malls starting out. There was a sort of sense of excitement in the UK, actually. I mean, coming out of a time where I think it had been pretty sort of depressing. So there was all of that. There was this lovely moment. And I think that I could see that this luxury goods and beautiful pieces, there's a moment. So whether that's disruption, was that the first one? Or discovery, I don't know. I guess I saw a bit of an opportunity, and a time when I also come from a very entrepreneurial background, so my entire family have their own businesses. So it was very normal to me in a way to be talking about business.
You went to a convent school. But then, so somewhere along the line, and then at 16 you had this vision of having an accessories handbag shop. What point are you talking about now? You wanted to become an entrepreneur when you were at school or when you went to Italy?
I think from sort of 16, 17, 18. I think it was the backdrop of things happening, and I think the fact that I come from a family that have businesses, so it felt reasonably normal, and the fact that I didn't think I really want to spend 3 years studying. Actually, I wanted to kind of crack on. So I was excited by that. And I don't know whether you're born an entrepreneur or whether you're made an entrepreneur, probably a bit of a combination. I think nurture and nature, who knows. But I knew that's what I wanted to do, and I wanted to get on and get going.
So you're finishing school, you've had a vision of having a handbag store, And so you thought you'll just do that. Is that how it worked?
I think that I thought I'd just start. And I think that I was very supported to just start. And I think it's very interesting now if I look at kids. I mean, I think if you're a natural academic or you want to do a career that needs the various qualifications or, initials after your name, that I think it's great to go and do that. And for a lot of kids, it's time to explore and get to know who they are. Somehow I felt like I was ready just to kind of get going and learn for 3 years. In a way, I had that grace period of where my friends were at university to actually just try things. And so I went out to Florence, which I knew was sort of the home of leather then, and I saw a bag that all the kind of Italians were wearing. In those days, people weren't travelling as much. There wasn't the EasyJets and the Ryanairs. And so the fashions were different in Italy from London, for example. And I saw this particular bag I thought was very kind of cool and Italian and would sell well. And I approached some factories to try and get some samples made and to get a price. And I was then thinking how I could sell it. And in the back of a magazine, it was then called Harpers Queen, which is now Harper's Bazaar, they had a monthly offer. And I thought, well, maybe that's the way to try it. And I knew someone who had a stepmother who worked in that department. So I took a suitcase of samples, and she loved the bag, and it was a good bag. And she brought in the fashion editor going, isn't this exciting? And we sold 500 and made £7,000 profit.
So you went specifically with the sort of task you set yourself of finding different products which weren't available in the UK, were available in Italy, and then selling them here.
Exactly that. And I remember my father had said to me, sometimes you don't need to invent things, you can just go and find something and bring it to a new market.
That was a big step, though, convincing the Harpers and Queen to carry it, wasn't it, for a young girl?
Yeah, and it was actually an even bigger step to convince a factory, interestingly, because I think it's an effort to make samples. She's young, she doesn't speak the language, doesn't really know what invoicing and payment terms and all those things. So I think that's the bit in business that is the absolute must-have. So whether it's nature or nurture or learn, the bit you kind of have to have is a bit of tenacity to convince people. And I think actually you need that in most sectors and industries. You need to be able to charm, you need to be able to convince. I can't tell you how many times in my very long career, I've sort of said little seeds grow into big trees. It's really trying to convince people it's worth it, and being fun to work with, or being a sort of sunny part of their day. Just you arrive with coffee and a nice cake, whatever it might be. But you've got to convince people to take a bet on you, because frankly they don't need it. And that was the hardest bit in a way. And I was invited to many piano bars in an inappropriate way in those days, with sort of male factories, and you're like, no, it's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a supplier. And then convincing the magazine to run it, and would I actually deliver? And that was kind of a bit of a bet. And then actually being able to sort of finance that and make sure I could manage that too.
So you got money from somewhere.
Well, I actually managed to persuade the factory to give me terms so that I could be paid before I paid. But I had a backup, which is I spoke to my dad, which is exactly the right thing to do at 18, I think, to say, would you, if it went wrong and I didn't sell enough, or if I had to pay sooner than I didn't sell them in time in order to meet the terms, that you would be my backstop, which he agreed to do. And I didn't need it, which was great. But I think, you have to have that backstop in whatever you do. And banks, as we know, no good anymore.
Forget banks for startups.
There's sort of nowhere to go. I think that's the hardest bit now when I talk to a lot of people wanting to start businesses. It's how do you get that seed capital or that backup? Okay,
so you're saying you managed to, so you had your dad as a guarantor effectively.
Yeah.
But you managed to convince the supplier. But the bag that you spotted wasn't just sort of buying one off the shelf, because you spotted the design, and then it was also finding the design, the manufacturer.
Yeah. So I had to convince that. So I had to place an order, not knowing how many I'd sell. Obviously, I got the best intel I could from the magazine, and I had to take the bet on placing that product, knowing that I could negotiate 30 days before I paid them, hoping I would be paid by the magazine before I had to pay them. So that's how I worked it. Yeah.
But the bag. So you'd spotted a particular bag. So
yes,
you didn't just go to the manufacturer of that particular bag?
No, I designed a bag,
Oh,
essentially.
you designed a bag in a similar...
It was a sort of reasonably generic design,
okay, so
but I designed it. And I remember actually found it on one of the bridges here in London, thinking I really want to have my brand on it. And I remember finding a die stamper, which I didn't know what that was, to make, and I remember getting a logo designed and managing to get the die stamp made on one of the, there's a beautiful old building, literally on the bridge of one of the bridges here, and managing to get that to Italy in time for the production to be made with my logo on it, which was a big moment.
Okay, right. So you were inspired by the Italian designs, but came up with your own design, and then managed to convince. And then Harpers and Queen, did they see what drawings of you? Did you have a prototype?
No, I had a prototype. I had a sample. Yeah.
And how much were bags then?
$39.99. I mean,
so it wasn't even then that wasn't a huge amount of money.
Funny enough, that's probably the equivalent of, I don't know, £300 now. It would be the sort of, or maybe
so it's
200.
mid-level, is it?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And funny enough, I've still got that first that page in my office of that offer page.
Convincing Harpers and Queen, that would be. Nowadays, if you're trying to do that, there'd be a queue, down Oxford Street to get that deal done.
Well,
wouldn't there?
maybe, but there's always, I think there's always opportunity somewhere, and there's always, and it's a bit of luck, it's a bit of connections. And I had this friend of a friend who had the stepmother, who worked in that department. So I guess that was a bit of a leg up. But you got to find leg ups where you've got them. And sometimes, I always, I appreciate I'm lucky, as in I had a parent who would take that bet on me, and I had a connection into the magazine. But actually, there's always some connection or something you can pull off. You just have to work those bits of luck.
You're sort of a one-product company at that time?
Yeah.
And you decided to trade in your own name?
Yeah.
Which you always have, obviously?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. But it was a one product, so then you...
And it was, for me, it felt like a one project. I didn't feel like I could then go and sell, rightly or wrongly, sell that bag to someone else. So I ended up going back to the factory and designing more things and started selling to shops. And actually that was a sort of slightly harder journey, because I remember having lots of bad debts. I remember selling and getting orders. Getting the orders was okay. But I remember there was one shop on Sloane Square called Midas. And I remember, they owed me £7,000, whatever, I'm making the number up. And I remember thinking, I've just got to go and sit in there until they pay me. I've got to make them feel uncomfortable, because, I can't afford not to be paid. And I think it was like 90 days and 120 days. And, I was having to pay the supplier, and it was really difficult. So,
I mean, that's, is that the sort of thing you think an entrepreneur has to do?
I think the thing about being an entrepreneur is you have to do what you have to do. In running a company, that's sometimes really uncomfortable. And I think as an entrepreneur, you get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
I think I've got some quotes from your book, and one of them, I think, is this you? Entrepreneurs are the idiots who risk their houses to start a company.
The amazing thing about entrepreneurs is that they really believe. And sort of that against all the odds, it's going to be okay. And that is, I think, quite a common trait in entrepreneurs, that they're almost, they're optimists, almost too much so, that they really are forever think the belief is there. And that's something I think you have to have. And that belief not only means you take the risks, and it's hard, and sometimes it doesn't always work, but also that belief means you convince people. But I think it's very important that governments, we know that businesses are the engine of the economy, that, it's unbelievably important for employment and for growth. And therefore, you need to make it quite easy, I think, for entrepreneurs, because they take crazy risks and on behalf of, in a way, the economy to a certain extent. And so therefore, you need to make it quite easy for them. Right now, I think it's all been a bit too difficult. We won't get into that, but maybe we will. But I think, free up these ridiculous optimists because they're doing a kind of a greater good for the economy. And it needs to be quite easy, because actually it's pretty hard. You're juggling so much, and the stakes often are pretty high. And so it's important, I think, to cut these poor entrepreneurs some slack.
So on our journey, you have you've sold some handbags, you've spotted the opportunity, or with your design skills, you've used your selling skills, you've lined up the magazine, which does one end, and you've got the manufacturer you're happy with who's treating you well on the other end. You're struggling with stores to get them to pay you, and then what happens next?
So I carry on with the stores relentlessly and do grow that and start to get some export orders. I worked out that there were some buying houses in those days in London that represented some of the overseas stores like Barney's and Bergdorf Goodman and Saks Fifth Avenue and so on. And they were based in London, and they would sort of try and find new interesting brands, and they would coordinate the orders. And so you could show them your samples locally, and they would place orders, or when the buyers came over, they would come to the buying house and they would make sure you had an audience with the buyers. And I got my first order from Bergdorf Goodman. And I remember ringing my mother in Golden Square in a red telephone box. Those were real things in those days. And going, I got an order. So that was my first export order, which is exciting.
So just to do so how many different types of bags do you have at that point?
I think probably a collection of 4 or 5 from memory. I remember designing a mini bag and a smaller mini duffel bag. So it was a mini version of what I'd done and added in some mini bags.
And were those bags particularly different to, sorry, just on the bags, just to get that fixed, were they particularly different to what was out there?
Yes, they were actually. So I would say there was more design integrity in terms of your disruption piece. And so it felt, the first one was sort of a bag I'd seen, which I think was lovely but was sort of inspired by something that was already around. This was certainly more directional and more original. So I approached, and by the way, that's always quite difficult when you're breaking into a market and you've got to convince a buyer to buy from someone who's unknown, but something that's also more original, therefore perhaps slightly more risky, and versus them buying more from a trusted supplier with, it's very hard. You have to kind of do something different.
So it was basically a smaller handbag and there wasn't really that on the market?
Yeah, I think people hadn't done mini versions of bags before. So they were not scarily difficult shapes, although some are more original, but they were to scale down. I don't think people had scaled them down, and the idea of this being a sort of mini bag was a bit of a thing. Okay,
so when you went to Italy, did you have mini bags in mind, or did you see mini bags in Italy?
I went to Italy with mini bags in mind, so it was a new concept to take.
So you'd come up with this concept?
Yeah.
Ah, okay, yeah. So you really did sort of dream it up in your bedroom at home and then head off.
Exactly.
And did they exist in Italy, or they didn't exist there?
No, I think they did.
Oh, so you could have disrupted. You were really disrupting. It wasn't you were copying a
product.
Overstate
it because I was quite young, but yeah, it was. Listen, it was an original product, and you need an original product ideally. Well, you can have a product that isn't distributed in a market and approach a new market, or you can slightly alter something that's around, or you can come up with something. There's lots of different ways, and there's no right or wrong, I think, in approaching a new product line. But when you're selling to customers who don't know you, can't trust you, you've got to find something, whether that's something new or what you're talking about in terms of brand, or you've got to bring something. You've got to convince these American buyers coming to this buying house in Golden Square to buy your product. And so there needs to be some winning formula.
They would have 10 meetings where all the handbags are the same size, and then you'd come in, a young girl of 18, 19 or whatever.
Here's a mini bag range.
And you got a mini bag.
Exactly. And by the way, it was fascinating. There was this amazing buyer. I remember seeing her once in Paris. Sometimes, because you then worked out there was fashion weeks and you had to go to these various different markets where people were buying at certain times, and you sort of worked out how to sort of play it. And I learnt that through these buying houses, and so started showing at fashion weeks. But sometimes you go to these buying houses in Paris and you turn up and there were 40 of us with our suitcase as a product, and you had 10 minutes to go into a room and get out your product and make it look pretty on a table, and you'd stand there. And this wonderful buyer became a friend later on, came in and she was decked in Chanel, and she had a zillion sort of necklaces of pearls. So she would sort of like the sort of sound of her jangling as she came in, and everyone sort of stood to attention, and she would literally come in and go, yes, no, yes,
it's a bit devil's whip.
A little bit, yeah. That was the time, and I was a yes, and I couldn't believe it. And the next table was a no, and I felt so embarrassed. Poor girl, we'd all put our life's work and sweat and tears into this product, and you didn't even have a chance to really sell it. She just would literally say yes or no, and so it was tough. It was tough, and if you got a yes, then you got an order, and again they would, I remember then moving my production from Italy. I had a problem because they were copying my designs. So these mini bags were good. I was ordering 300 tops probably. Painful customer, needing to do something quite detailed because I needed a different product that would differentiate itself from everything else. I wasn't going to place a huge order. And I remember someone saying to me, one of the buyers, by the way, this factory in Florence, they are making 50 for you, but they're making 400 for Harvey Nichols, or whoever it was. Mm-hmm. Sorry, not naming names and shaming, since I'm making the names up, yeah. So I had to move away from that factory, and I brought my production back to the UK, which was lovely. And I managed to find a very, very small kind of it was a very small manufacturer. And I toured lots of factories in the UK, and it was a very interesting moment. It was the sort of the demise of manufacturing. I literally watched it break down. I remember going to certain factories and seeing on the wall all those clock-in cards for workers, and there was space for 500, and there were just 10. And trying to find the hardware and all the sort of remaining sub-trades that would support the handbag industry, the hardware, the frames, the buckles, the leather. It was just getting more and more sort of diminished. It's very sad, actually. But I did manage to find someone who could make my handbags. I also really made sure I lent into the product being very original, and we actually did some very original pieces, which was one handbag that had a clasp on top that opened up like an umbrella. And the clasp on top was inspired by an old perfume bottle lid. And I found this amazing girl in Clerkenwell who was a jewellery maker who could make this perfume bottle lid like jewellery. So we would do lost wax casting. And there's this incredible old workshop in Clerkenwell Green that was an old converted hospital. And she would cast the pieces of metal, she would finish them. They would then go to the basement to another supplier to be gold-plated, and then to another supplier in the same building to be lacquered. And then it would go back up to be finished, and then it would go in my car to be open the boot, to put into the supplier's boot, and then he would make the product. And what I also learned the hard way was then I got my first export orders, and I got an order from Hong Kong.
Is any competition emerging? Are people spotting what you're doing?
Yes, there was actually, but in a funny way that also shows the market's growing a little bit, and so getting more orders and growing a wholesale business, growing an export business, starting to talk about let's have a budget for the year. I remember, and my dad, bless him, who's still on my board to this day, at nearly 86. Was an amazing mentor, and I think, as I say, I think mentorship, or finding someone you can go to with your problems and genuinely feel like you can share everything, because it's hard when, being a mentor, as you will be a million times over, it's quite hard, you don't want to end up with the sort of baggage of everyone's problems, but he really was someone I could go to, and he would give me very tough, but give me great advice. And I remember him saying, well, what's your budget for the year? And I remember thinking, well, how will I have a budget? I have no idea if I'm going to sell anything. Like, how can I have a budget? Yeah. But of course, it was actually great advice, because what it made you do is go, well, I'm going to try and sell 10, and my costs are going to be 5. So it gives you a framework. But I remember laughing and thinking, don't be ridiculous. How can I have a budget? I just don't know. But actually, it forces you to put some sort of forecast, and then, apply the cost of that forecast and start to have a plan. And that was quite a breakthrough moment, I think, for me, in a way. Even though I laughed at the time, but it was actually a bit of a moment. And then it's funny if there's a momentum that starts to happen. So
you're doing okay in the UK, and then you've got your Bergdorf Goodman order. And was there other orders from the US as well?
Yeah, and also overseas, Japan and Hong Kong.
And could you still do that in the UK? Like, that was London in that time? Could you still?
I think I had to. I can't quite remember, to be honest, but I think I probably had to go to Paris. And be around for a meeting with one of those buying houses when a lot of those buyers would go to Paris to buy. So sometimes I'd have to take a plane in those days and go and see buyers. I think I remember once taking an Air India flight to New York to go and meet that boat. I couldn't afford a hotel, so I think I literally went for the day. I think I spent the night on the plane. Right. And seeing buyers there, just trying to sort of learn. And there's so many learnings, because it's about the visual merchandising, it's about the marketing, it's all those things that you have no money for either. And often when you get into those stores, they then say, well, there's a 5% marketing budget that you have to play, just trying to navigate all of that.
And did they know, did you still have the single supplier in the UK?
No, I think at this point, I honestly, I don't know the chronology. I'm sorry, I'm blur on the whole thing. I should write it down one day. But I did, quite soon, I did move back to Italy. I'm trying to remember what stage. I honestly can't remember.
Did you just have one? Well, you had a reliable supplier in Italy.
Yes, I mean, I could only manage one supplier, because it was better to have all my eggs in one basket. Weirdly, to have some numbers rather than to have the if I could spread it, it'd be great, because you had some sort of sense of putting them against each other. But I was so little. It was better to go all in and totally befriend them like they were your mates, and have some leverage through friendship and loyalty, because I had no other leverage. It's all I had. Yeah. So I think I went to an Italian manufacturer and kept the UK one and had an additional manufacturer in Italy.
So somewhere soon, you opened a shop on the first floor in Walton Street in sort of Knightsbridge. Yeah.
I opened a tiny store. So it was sort of the point of thinking I might need an office, because I still had my photocopier on my laundry basket, which is kind of stressful, actually. I remember thinking I could probably do that, and I wanted to open an office and a sort of an atelier sales room as well. So it was sort of a shop, stroke studio, and I opened that. That was an amazing moment, because it gave me a chance to explain the world. It therefore gave a sense of, if someone was to open, and I didn't realise this at the time, but if someone was to open another shop in another country, they had something to visualise. I guess it was your shop fit, it was your brand DNA, it was all those things which I didn't know what that meant. But you worked on your logo, you worked on your shop design, you worked on presentation, you honed your range. It forced you to do a whole lot of things. What that led to was lots of direct customers, which I had for the first time, which was really useful because you got feedback. I also managed to get lots of really great customers. We'd had Princess Diana coming through the door and coming up and ordering. We had lots of European royalty. We had lots of, Elle Macpherson would suddenly arrive, which is a big day. And so you managed to get some direct customers. You learnt from them, and that also meant that you could, leverage that with publicity and so on.
But that would be quite a lot of publicity, wouldn't it? Princess Di will use one of your handbags?
Yeah, it was an amazing moment, and such a leg up, an incredibly generous thing from her. And that came through Bruce Oldfield, who was making her dresses down the road, who I had met, and he then said she needs a bag to match the dress that he was making. And so I supplied him, and then she finally came direct and would come, and we'd often make her handbags, and so an incredible moment, obviously. So all of that happened because I had a store. Also,
but all of that happened because you're a nice person. So just to kill that myth, that business is cutthroat, I don't think business is that cutthroat. Business is about, probably the most building relationships with people.
Exactly. I think it's the antithesis of cutthroat.
Yes,
business is about
forget that
leverage
bad business rubbish.
Absolutely. It's about leverage of friendships in supplier situations and friendships with people wanting to support you in a sales situation. For me, if you're not nice, you don't win. I mean, it's really
and even
important.
in negotiation, if you one tips I give in negotiation, sometimes there can be a deal which is too good
100%.
because you just give so much incentive for the other person to break that deal,
Absolutely.
and even if it's a legal situation, whatever, but they will break the deal. You can't. Everyone's got to win somehow.
100%. I totally agree. And I've had people who work with me who have been really aggressive and got a deal that then, of course, the moment something went wrong, which they often do, something doesn't work or whatever, they can't wait to break you down and really take you to the cleaners. So you need relationships.
Well, not even out of revenge, it's just because there's nothing in it for them.
Well, quite, exactly. And so what also came out of that, which was really very important, was the fact that I had an approach from a Hong Kong Chinese woman, amazing woman, girl, in fact, who was at the London Business School, or School of Economics, or one of them. And she was a very regular customer, and she had a lot of her friends in Hong Kong asking to take my handbags back because they couldn't get them in Hong Kong. And she approached me. She was very similar age, actually very young, and she approached me to say, could she open a shop for us in Hong Kong? I'd never been to Hong Kong. It's kind of exciting. And I guess it was a franchise, but I didn't know what a franchise was. And I was like, yeah, absolutely, let's do it. But what that meant, that was my first ground floor shop in Hong Kong, and I never designed.
Label with your brand name, Anya Hindmarch, on it.
So I flew out there with my dad.
Yes.
We shared a room. When we checked into the hotel, they thought we had two separate beds, and they said maybe you'd want a double bed. I mean, no, he really is my dad. But I mean, like all the weird things that happen. And we, I didn't want to be in a mall because I felt that a mall felt very, not very European. So I wanted to be in a street, and we found this amazing, really run-down street, but it had the car park where all the wealthy ladies would park as they went into the malls. I thought it was a kind of good idea with my Chinese partner. What I didn't realise, of course, is it's 100 degrees and very humid. And in fact, quite soon we did move into a mall. But that little store did really well. And it forced me again to work out very quickly overnight, what is my shop fit, what's my brand DNA? And lots of the codes that we still have to this day, the stripy carry bag, the stripy awning, the swinging handbag sign on the outside, the sort of like the sign, and a lot of the ticking dust bags, all those things we had to quickly put in have become codes that have sort of been enshrined in a way, and they're sort of still very much part of the brand that came from having just to kind of go, what are we, who are we? We're opening a store in Hong Kong. And I learnt loads.
It was a franchise.
Well, yeah, so she owned the territory, so it was a franchise deal. She bought from us at wholesale price and sold it at retail price.
So it was a low-risk move for you.
No
so
capex.
It could,
No capex, basically.
Yes, and it could fail independently of you.
Exactly.
So it was quite a good opportunity.
Absolutely. And franchises then became a way, that business grew into a number of stores in Hong Kong, and then we were approached by a Japanese franchise partner, and we grew and opened, and then Malaysia and Singapore, and on and on. And so we grew our business through the franchise model, which meant there was very little capex, meaning I wasn't spending the money on the shop fit, nor was I signing the leases, so no risk. But I was getting someone who was, if you like, on the hook for buying my product to build their store. So it was a great way to grow the business.
Yeah, so this must have been thrilling, no?
It was. We grew really quickly, and we grew to 20 stores very, very quickly.
And how old were you by then?
I don't know, maybe 20. Let me think. So I remember when we opened the first store in Hong Kong.
Just roughly.
It was 93. I think I was about 24.
So, everyone else is finishing university and you've got a global business already.
Yeah, we've got a shop in Hong Kong.
Yeah, but still.
But that led very quickly. By the time I was
and
30, we had lots of stores globally.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
I think. I could be wrong on my
So was
dates,
that the business model going forward then?
Well, it was in addition to opening. I then opened a concession in Harvey Nichols and a ground floor store in Pont Street, which we still have to this day. So we opened, those were our own risk, our own capex.
And just on that strategy, given you've got risk-free, why would you take any risk?
Because I wanted my home market. I felt bad that I had this exposure with stores overseas, and I didn't have anything in my home market. It felt weird.
But could you have done another franchise at home?
No, well, maybe, but it felt affordable, and I did the math. I remember doing the maths on the Pont Street store and thinking I could sign this shop, and I know the rent, and I think I now know from other stores what I think I will take. And the business was making enough money that I could take that risk. And I remember doing the same for Harvey Nichols, opening a concession there, and then Harrods, and on and on and on. So we then started opening stores that are our own risk, and then later on we opened stores in the States. And
which were your own?
Yeah.
And still without raising any external capital?
Yes, I think so. I think we opened the first stores in America without any external capital. But I then, and I really can't remember the years, sorry, I didn't realize it was this granular, I should have this in writing.
They call it mid-20s.
But no, I was probably older by then, certainly older by then. And we were approached by very dear friends of ours, actually, who were at Goldman's, and there was a kind of group of Goldman's incumbents and alums who were putting together a fund and wanted to invest, and luxury brands were very buzzy and something they wanted to get involved in. They sort of actually kind of, in a really nice way, went, we really want to buy them. And I said, I don't think I need to at the moment. I think we're so good. But they charmed me into it. And I then thought, actually, I could perhaps open a store on Bond Street or Sloane Street, and I can then grow a web business and a corporate business, and perhaps it would allow me to go a bit faster. And they came on board, can't remember the year, but it was a really wonderful, happy, brilliant relationship. They were very present. They were home.
Did you give up much control of your company?
No, it was a minority investment, and I actually can't remember the percentage now, but it was minority, maybe like 20%, perhaps from memory. And they were great people, dear friends to this day. This bracelet is from them. There's a stone for every one of them. And we had a really good time, and we grew the business quite aggressively and well and profitably, and they needed to show a return after 5 years. And so we went to market together, and they had an exit, and I had a sort of partial exit, and then investment into the company with the next investor. So
the stores grew very quickly. The number of stores grew very quickly.
Yeah.
And the peak was like 50, 60 or
well,
something?
The peak in the whole period was 65. In the stage they were invested, I can't remember, it might be 40. Actually, I'm making the numbers up, I can't remember. But we got to 60, the most number of stores we've ever had, stores and concessions, were 65 that we were.
So if we go over the next 10 years or so, then that's the model was some of your own stores and franchise stores with a solid investor behind you who very supportive, and you got on
really well with.
And what about, so that's the sort of stores side, then the product side.
Yeah.
And if I had to, would you, when I went into your store in Pont Street, and well, one of them, would you say, you're almost like the Damien Hirst of you combine, or the Marcel Duchamp, the fountain, the original artwork from, you almost combine things which, Coke cans into, and as you said before, an umbrella into a handbag. Is that
So, well, product-wise, we've always had an element of creativity and humour, and that's been there from very early days, actually, as I evolved the collections, because it's a very crowded market. You've got to stand out. And so we always used to, I remember when we opened our first shop in New York, which was the smallest shop ever, so much so it didn't have a loo, you didn't have a bathroom in it. My poor team, I was like, you have to go down the road, they knock on the door of Starbucks and go for a pee. But it's all we could afford at the time. It was tiny, but it was just off Madison Avenue. It was great. And I remember trying to convince the landlord, my God, to let me rent that store. And going to see him in his boardroom, and he sat, I'd never forget, he was the most amazing man, actually. He became a supporter for a long time, but he sat at the end of the boardroom table, and we were asked to sit at this end. It was like quite a power move. And I remember showing him, walking down and giving him my accounts to try and convince him that I'd be a good bet to take this tiny, tiny store, which is like 200 square feet, not even. And he looked at my accounts and laughed and threw them back down this table at me, and trying to find a way to convince him. And again, through charm, actually, just saying, look, I'm young, I really want to break into this market. And I think he not took pity, but I think he was kind of excited to be part of the journey. And he literally attended every opening, every project, everything for years. The nicest man.
So how many products do you think you've had?
Oh my God, I mean, like too many. Like, I mean, you know, we do collections 4 times a year, which probably have, I mean, 500, it used to be 700, 500 SKUs. So that's, you know, if you think about the amount of R&D and product development in fashion is kind of crazy. So it's a lot.
How many people do you, I mean, have at the peak and now, what sort of people are involved? Headcount?
Headcount. We're probably, head office is probably about 70, and the stores, I don't know, and then we've got a team in Japan, but peak, we had offices in Japan, Hong Kong, the States, and all the retail teams, I don't know, a lot. I mean, not a lot, actually, not a lot. Maybe peak was probably 300, something like that, so it's not huge.
And do you see every design that is...
Yeah, no, completely. I'm...
Every single one?
Absolutely, that's my job, yeah. So
and how long do you spend on each? Do you sort of and or you're like, yes, no, no?
Depends.
Yes.
Sometimes you work through many iterations, other times you know immediately and you get it right, so it just depends. But, you know, we have multiple sort of sampling stages of each product, and certain things become carryover product that you have for a long time, and that's the game. But other things you need to refresh, and you have seasonal products, so it's between the carryover and the seasonal. It becomes quite a science, actually, in the sort of families and stories that you have, which we sort of study. So you get quite organised on product development and the merchandising of collections and the codes, and also where you make things and how you have carryover leathers, and you've got all the sort of, you know, the efficiencies of working with certain materials, and it gets quite complex. And I remember a lovely golden moment when I used to always be fighting up against the minimums of everything. So, you know, we would want to do a particular colour green, but you couldn't because, you know, you'd have to commit to, you know, thousands of square feet of leather or material or whatever it was, or, you know, frames. And suddenly we got to an economy of scale with the number of stores and distribution that we had where I could design anything. And I remember Dan, my amazing COO at the time, and I was like, oh, I don't know if we could do this because he went, you can do what you want, because actually we now hit the minimums, it's fine, you can actually make what you want. And that was a massive moment because, and I still hit minimum problems now, and I think in every business, whatever the scale, you always hit that, but being able to design what you want as opposed to being to design within the straitjacket of what's available on the market. And when you start out, it's really hard. You are trying to come up with something very innovative that disrupts the market. You're trying to fit with something that people can make when you're a pain in the ass because you're small numbers. You're trying to work with what's available in the market that isn't bespoke without perhaps going to the jewellery maker, which I did originally, which, you know, is how I managed to find a way around. It's really hard. It's like, I always say it's like juggling and dancing with your hands tied behind your back sometimes.
And you know...
not that I want to put people off business. It's really fun.
No, well, it is hard. You have pretend. But everything's hard, isn't it?
Yeah,
when you want to be a good doctor, it's probably hard, isn't
sure.
it? You know? Would you say now that, you know, with your brand name, that you could almost, I don't mean this in not a bad product, but you can take more risk as well. Like if it's Anya Hindmarch, it's got to be good.
Yes,
you
well,
know,
and
like
that's what you didn't have.
It's a luxury brand.
So it's what you don't have at the beginning, where you're trying to convince someone who has you have no reputation, no...
Well, it's almost the opposite. What's this? Who's ever heard of that?
Exactly.
You know, like you can't wear 2 stripes, you've got to wear Adidas.
Exactly.
You know?
You've got to persuade it to be different because otherwise they won't buy it. But if it's too different, it's too scary. Are you going to deliver all those things we spoke about? But when you get to a certain stage and you have a reputation, you then can, and you have buyers who know and trust you, you can, at that point, you can rely a little bit more on that. You know, it's a bit easier, for sure.
So I think about your business in terms of stores, products, and promotion. And well, you know, your promotion is fantastic. I mean, Chubby Hearts, which maybe can explain what it is, but that wasn't just, you didn't make money out of that.
No.
It was promotion, wasn't it?
So we had a collection which was all quilted bags, which I thought was a fun idea, and I kind of like the word chubby. It actually has rather rude connotations in some markets, but which I didn't realise at the time. But anyway, I kind of stuck with it. And it's this lovely sort of quilted sort of product. And we had always done quite big shows by this stage in Fashion Week, where we put our heart and soul into these actually very, very expensive shows, which felt quite wasteful, honestly, in a sort of world where we're talking about the environment. But they also felt very exclusive and not very inclusive because they were for the fashion industry, which truthfully was becoming less and less important because the industry was a small group of people, and actually it didn't feel like going direct to the consumer. It felt this sort of rather exclusive audience. And I wanted to break out of that for lots of reasons. Also, they were very expensive. It was a time when I was having to do a bit of kind of cost saving on the business. And I was sitting in the Royal Albert Hall one night listening to Paolo Conti, and I had a glass of wine. Epic, which it is. It's one of the best cities. It is the best city in the world, I think. It's diverse, it's incredible, it's brave, and it's cultural, and it's, there's so much to do. And I remember thinking in a sort of slightly, after a glass of wine, listening to Paolo Conte, kind of slightly, if I put my brain into that kind of loose mode, I can have my best ideas. And I remember thinking that wouldn't it be lovely, Valentine's Day was coming up, as a tribute to the city, as a love letter to London, to tie a giant inflatable heart, helium-filled heart, to every bridge in the city. And imagine if you were flying into Heathrow and you just flew over this lovely Guerrilla activity. And the next day I thought, you know what, why not? Let's do that. It'd be a really fun, mad thing to do. And slightly ties back to my chubby product range, but also a civic project, so therefore it couldn't be commercial. So I just thought it'd be just a lovely love letter to the city. And that got quite difficult because you realise quite quickly that every bridge is half owned by one council and half owned by another, and that the strings of the balloon would tangle in the winds, and it's all quite complicated. So we decided to do a sort of Where's Wally approach, again, lean into the idea in the creative dip, and to think about approaching landlords and could we fly them ad hoc in different places all over the city as a sort of lovely surprise. And we squashed them into some amazing landmarks like Wellington Arch, and we worked with, it was the most exhausting project.
And they're quite big. They're helium balloons? Or
helium balloons the size of double-decker buses. They're big. They're big. And every helium fill was £14,000. It was a big project.
Everyone was £14,000?
Yeah.
So how many roughly did you have?
We had 9 balloons, which were all quite expensive,
yes.
but we filled them a number of times, I think about 29 times. But we managed to get the project funded by the landlords who wanted promotion by having a chubby heart on their land. So it was a win for us. We weren't having to do a big show. It was a win because it was a lovely thing to do for the city. We did it during Fashion Week. So on the day one of Fashion Week, the first balloon, as we were standing at the opening of Fashion Week, the first balloon just literally floated up in front of the window of the press pen. And then they went all over the city, funded some by us and some by the landlords because they paid to have it on their site. It was fantastically complicated because every single site had to have Civil Aviation Authority permission because they own the air, and it had to have landlord permission. We had to put
how high did they go?
Probably about 100 feet, some of them, depending on, but the wind is different at every level. I mean, there's nothing that I can't do. I could do a PhD on wind levels and helium. I mean, it's, without getting too much detail, it's probably boring for this, but I could write a book purely on that project. But it was that thing of I needed to do some sort of interesting promotion. I wanted to do something that was a civic project, so it was kind of generous. I wanted to leverage the landlords to effectively support the cost of the project and end up with everyone having a win. And everyone did have a win with that project. It was a really beautiful project.
So was that an idea to do promotion or that sort of marketing instead of just straight advertising? Was that?
I think it comes out of a need to find different ways to get cut through. It comes out of a fascination, which is sort of a bit of pure art for me, which I really love, and I think that the brand resonates with and for. And it also comes out of a creative curiosity. I mean, there are times when I do things that are just, there's no sense, but I just want to do them. And I think the lovely thing when you have your own brand, you can do that. And sometimes really great things come out of it, sometimes nothing comes out of it, but it's sort of, it can be also creative curiosity. But mostly it aligns with the business and has given us an edge where we needed one when we couldn't afford to do advertising. But all those things had a benefit to the other parties that we work with, and sometimes much more benefit, I would argue, for the partners we work with than for us. So sometimes it was just a philanthropic kind of project as well.
I have to ask you about, you're probably sick of talking about, it's not a plastic bag.
No, so never sick of talking about it. Yeah.
Which led to the only thing I can ever think of as Beatlemania, but bag mania or something.
That was a project in 2007 where I think Al Gore just brought out his book about the environment, and I think everyone was thinking, help, and what do we do? And I think we all felt as individuals pretty powerless, to be honest. So we launched this bag called I Am Not a Plastic Bag, which we launched. The book was called I Am Change the World for a Fiver, and it's all these different actions, and the book was a fiver. So I wanted the bag to be a fiver, which was obviously very different, and that in itself caused a lot of excitement because you can't normally buy an Anya Hindmarch bag for £5. So, and we also sold this bag at supermarkets because that was the coalface of the problem of single-use plastic. And so we launched with Sainsbury's, very brave move that they did. Again, super complex project. But we used that formula. The build-up by the time it came to launch was such that all the right people were wearing them, but no one could get them. By the time we launched for £5 in Sainsbury's, therefore wide distribution, affordability, 80,000 people queued in the UK in one day for that bag. I mean, it was absolutely mad.
Which store? Just all over the UK?
All the Sainsbury's all over the UK. So it was absolutely mad. And it became a really huge project. But the net result was that it changed the law. It meant that many countries, Wales started it, interestingly, and then other countries started charging for plastic bags as a result of the project. And the consumption of plastic bags reduced dramatically.
So massive good for mankind.
It was lovely.
But also, I mean, it must have been in the papers that because this Anya Hindmarch bag,
it was amazing
the
awareness
publicity must
for
have
us,
been
of course,
unbelievable.
and also, by the way, quite a lot of risk. Actually, there was quite a lot of it was hugely popular. Then a massive I remember having a Daily Mail reporter on my doorstep, literally, we live in the same street, saying, I want to know where they're made and how they're made, and is it fair trade cotton, and things that I hadn't considered because I was young and I didn't know what I was doing, and I was just trying to help with awareness. And I then went on to get very kind of neck deep in the whole subject. And that that project was completely not for profit and cost us. It was it was something we put money into. Finished the project, it made a difference. Went back to my normal business, but many years later, then realised the problem had not gone away because there's still 9 billion tons of plastic on the planet. I think today. And launched something called I Am a Plastic Bag, which was actually something that was made completely from recycled materials. That kept plastic out of landfill. So how can we reuse the stuff that is, I think someone said to me during the first project, when you throw something away, there is no way. And I remember just thinking, so obvious, but it's true. So the next project was talking about that. Everything was repurposed materials, including, apart from the leather, I won't go into that because it's too long a subject, but a really interesting one in that actually recycled leather is just basically bits of old leather mixed together with virgin plastic. So be very careful when you talk on the subject of leather. It's often misguided. It's actually kind of an amazing environmental product and material. But when we launched the I Am a Plastic Bag, we closed all of our stores for Fashion Week, and we took all the bags out and we filled them to the brim with 90,000 used plastic bottles right to the ceiling, which we collected ourselves as a company. Everyone had a quota they had to. I mean, I was on the Eurostar, going down the Eurostar with a bag, collecting all the bottles that were left. Other people were at marathons. Became quite a project. We all got COVID, and we filled all the stores up with plastic bottles, which was sort of part art installation and part protest to show people what 9 seconds of landfill.
I'm glad you explained that because I walked past your store and I didn't really click.
Yeah, but it's to sort of say this is 9. It was on the window. It's like this is 9 minutes, seconds, whatever it was of landfill. Yeah. You know what? And if you see it, and if you had to bury everything in your garden that you put in the bin, you just stop taking the plastic.
What about low-cost competitors?
I think it's kind of interesting and exciting. You can't stop change, and I think you've got to think, what does the consumer want? That will always lead everything. I think that if you can't beat them, join them. And we've done an amazing project with Uniqlo, which has been a really kind of incredible collaboration actually, which has given us access to 24 markets where we've launched a collaboration with them, which was hugely popular. And I learnt so much from that collaboration and these enormous global teams that you work with and how they work at scale.
What about the internet? That's going back quite a way.
But social media is amazing for all of us because before I would have to kind of go to a newspaper or magazine and convince them to share, to show my product. Now I can just literally put something online.
So you find it easier having that?
It's a huge tool, huge, and we can do projects in any of our worlds. I can do a project with Uniqlo and I can get loads of their followers, and you're just growing your audience. And our audience is 1 million people probably that directly follow us across various platforms, and I can kind of design something and kind of go, look at this, I did this today, and that goes immediately to 1 million people. I mean, it's so useful. So it's brilliant, and it's changing and changed, and all of that is super exciting. But that's a real plus. So
and what about the internet, like selling on the internet, selling online rather than on stores? Is that
amazing? Because I can speak first person to people on a screen. I can't be in every store. You don't rely on have brilliant sales associates, but it's very direct. You can you can not have the overheads of a store. Not to say that.
Do you think stores are going to decline?
Well, I mean, when we opened,
not yours particularly, but
village,
in general.
Well,
or
when I bought the business back, jumping around here, but I felt that the idea that had been for most of my career of kind of lots and lots of stores all over the world, the same one, the kind of cookie cutter store that you might see of lots of brands, for me felt a bit old-fashioned in a digital world. And I kept in my own head thinking, if retail is to exist in a digital world, there needs to be a reason to visit. It can't just be the same as online. So, which is why we opened the Village, which is this sort of experiential retail I mean, for me, it's just a playground, actually.
On Pont Street.
On Pont Street in Chelsea. And for us, that was, the combination of the efficiency and it's so easy, a website, you can do it from your bed or your office, but also if you want to go and visit and have an immersion in the brand, you can come to the village and you can really be immersed in the brand. So that's how we have approached it. So I think retail is actually sort of in decline, and you need to rethink how you approach it in the light of digital. I mean, I'm sure all of us buy an awful lot online rather than go to stores these days. So you need to, I think, probably not have as many stores, and when you have a store, it needs to be slightly different. It feels like there's a lot of headwinds. But, as my dad would say, he'd be much more interesting on this podcast than me, by the way. You should get him on, it's brilliant. He would say, it's just business.
Yeah, make it work.
Yeah.
Yes, no, that's a good point to sort of almost wrap up with. I mean, there's so many more so many more questions I could ask. I mean, I was going to talk to you about being a mum, but I don't think we'll have to get into that next time. But you are like such a representative of an entrepreneur, but also of a mother of five.
I'm a terrible mother.
No, you're 5 children, and to
parent themselves.
To balance that, and also just as a personal thing, I grew up growing up in a care system and with family that wasn't my own family, and it wasn't close to my foster father. But you having kids, you call them inherited kids, stepchildren, and treating them the same as your children. It's just a sign of a good person. And we haven't got time to go into the charity work you've done with your involvement with the Royal Marsden and the Arts Council, and being on the Chamber of Ambassador for Britain for business. So there's a lot we could have talked about, but I mean, what we have
over
talked
dinner
about,
in our street, right?
yes, on a Sunday lunch. No.
Yeah, exactly.
What we have talked about has been fascinating, and congratulations! You were on the front page of the.
Yes, thank you
that
for
right?
that was so nice. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, I organised that. I didn't actually. That was completely.
I'm sure you did.
That was complete. No, it was completely coincidental.
Well, very kind. Thank you very much.
Has that changed your life?
100% changed my life. Yeah. Oh, what you mean the Dame period?
Yes, being on the front page of the newspaper.
That's what I meant, exactly.
Yes.
Being on the front page of City AM changed my life.
I'll leave it there, being on the City AM Business with Personality. Well, that's you, Business with Personality. Well, thank you very much. It's been really interesting, and it went so quick. We had so much to talk about.